flag of the United States of America.
Thank you. Petra, could I ask you to do the roll call, please?
Chairman Farrell,
Here?
Mayor Bell,
Here.
Ms. Kay. Here. Mr. Spencer.
Here. Before we move into the official business, I'd like to welcome the newest member of the Town Council to the Ways and Means Committee. Lance, very nice to have you here with us today.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, first order of business is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting, November 5th. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So move.
Anybody want to second that?
Second it.
Any discussion?
No changes, Mr. Chairman.
Hearing none, let's vote, please. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm going to abstain since I wasn't here.
Perfect. So 3 ayes and 1 abstention.
Is that okay?
He's new.
Yeah.
Yes, that's fine.
I mean, I was here, but I was in the audience.
Okay, thank you. Citizens' comments. Any citizens' comments on the agenda items? Jim, come on, you can say something, can't you? Let's moving on to old business. First order of old business is to review and recommend to the town council the employee medical insurance premium structure.
Thank you. Good morning. We talked about this last month, and I was asked to provide some more information that I sent it to you all. So just in short, the health insurance is one of the benefits that the town provides to the employees, full-time employees. And we can do 3 things here, what we asking for you to choose from this. Pretty much do nothing, and the employees and employer will pay the premiums as are dictated by PIBA, our insurance provider. The second option is continue the current structure that is 20% of the full premium, which is employee plus employer. 20% of it is paid by employee and 80% by the town. However, in some cases, the 20% is more than the PBAS rate, so it's capped at the PBAS rate. And this is mostly for the employees on a single plan. The third option is that the town will have an additional funding to the premiums that are dictated by PIBA. And we're asking that this amount of this additional funding would be the cost of the insurance premium for the single employee. And that's how it was like years ago. So we ask that you consider the third option. But if you have any questions on any other options, I'll be happy to answer.
Okay, for the record, can you explain the difference again between number 1 and number 2?
Yes, so number 1 is that you have in the attachment, there is premiums that are provided by PIBA, and that's what we will pay. The employee will pay, for example, the single employee will pay $97.68 for health, and the employer will pay $527. So that's the first option.
The full family would pay?
The full family will pay $306. And the employer will pay $1,449. The second option is that if we add those 2 numbers, the 20% of that will be paid by employee and 80% by the town, by the employer.
So you add add which 2 numbers?
Employee portion and employer, and have a total premium.
Oh,
Total premium will be paid to PIBA. Mm-hmm.
So the employer's already paying 75%, so you're just saying that the employer would pick up a little bit more?
Correct. In some cases.
Okay, so I misunderstood from the last time, sorry, Mr. Chairman, but I misunderstood from last time that the proposal, the 80-20 proposal, that the town was picking up 80% of the employee's
No,
share?
no.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry if I was confused.
Okay.
No, it's from the total premium that is paid to PIBA, those two, employee and employer.
So the difference between A and B is, in B, the full family and the employee with
Family
children
and
pay a little
spouse.
bit less.
Correct.
Because they're capped out by the PIBA.
Correct, correct.
But it doesn't affect the single
Single.
employee or the employee spouse.
Yes. When this structure was established years ago, 20% was still less than what PIBA for single was less. So pretty much every employee had some benefit in that structure. Right now, it's only, benefiting just less than half of, or
And option B is what we're doing today.
correct.
So
And we-
option A would be actually,
Do nothing, or no additional funding.
So if I could kind of follow up on that, so I just want to understand, so under the 80/20, there would be no additional subsidy provided for the standard plan for a single?
Correct.
Because
Correct.
the town already picks up 85%?
Correct, that's correct.
Okay.
It would be, if you do the same math for a full family, they would still get a little bit subsidy, but that's the only group, those two groups will benefit. So we do not recommend that option.
and then the third option you're saying is, very simply put, give everybody an extra about $113.
Yes.
So it makes the employee zero contribution.
Correct,
And to make it equal for everybody, you gave that $113 to the rest of the categories.
correct. So we're asking it's going to be
just the-
133.
The 113 is something beyond just the single employee standard plan?
Yes, it's dental, it's, because it's the full package. So dental, it's health insurance, dental, and vision, which is actually 133, not 113.
133.
But we can take just health. Yes.
And that was what it used to be?
It used to be, when we first started, like 8 years ago, and maybe 5 years ago, we changed that to the 2080.
And what was the rationale for that?
It was the mayor and the council. Honestly, they didn't like the idea of free insurance. Yes,
Pardon?
I'll just be honest. For a single, yeah. They didn't like the idea of free insurance.
Well, and we can't, and I don't want to try to put words in our fellow council member's mouth, who's not at this particular meeting, but will be this afternoon. I think he was more supportive, as I recall,
Yes.
of 100%
Yes.
coverage, at least of some level, basic.
For single, yes.
But I just want to go back to the dental and the vision, because basic dental and basic vision are already covered.
So,
But
well, for single.
Yes.
Well, so,
Yeah.
well, employee but dental plus. Okay, so
no.
we're going like into those, so I did the full package, and majority of.
When you say full package, you mean plus, not,
Plus, yes, but usually people do have dental, health is great, but when you look at how our insurance portfolio looks like, you see everyone is wearing glasses, so we all have vision. We all have dental, and dental, pretty much single dental doesn't really cover anything, so everyone has dental plus, hence,
but there is a basic dental plan, but it covers nothing?
well, maybe not nothing, but
It's usually,
Cleaning a year, one
Yeah.
cleaning a year and 50% of your cavities.
yeah. It's
Okay.
very,
Okay.
it's more out-of-pocket cost.
Okay.
How many employees do we have?
we have 27, but we are gonna get 2 more. We had 28, but Ruti left, so we're looking for a replacement and 1 more in the code enforcement.
So am I correct when I say, for number 1, everybody could pay the state PIBA
Correct.
minimum? Number 2, currently everybody is paying the state PIBA minimum
For single, yes.
Okay. And number 3, you'd want to have a contribution for $133 for everybody. to reduce
Correct.
costs. We're currently at number 2. I think you guys know I'm probably the most conservative here. I think that, first, I don't like to look at benefits in isolation. I like to look at the whole benefits package. That's the way I was always raised. So you look at salary, you look at healthcare, you look at retirement, you look at all vacation, paid time off, whatever. I'm not excited about looking at this in isolation, and if you do that, you'll always increase every little piece, at least in my experience. Everybody wants a little bit more. So I did look at this with Dorada, and it wasn't material. There was something in the order of 1.5% to 2% increase for kind of the general categories, if you will, of employees. We averaged the higher cost employees and the lower cost employees and looked at it. Kind of 1% to 2% is kind of the range. But I would rather take a look at this personally as a total package. And when we look at salaries, we look at bonuses, we look at changes in vacation. That's my view on this. So I would be an advocate for no change at this time until we did a comprehensive package. That's just what I'm thinking. Other thoughts?
Maintaining the status quo.
Maintain the status quo.
Well, I certainly, the town administrator and I have had ongoing discussions. You've been brought into a little bit of those about some HR and compensation and benchmarking related issues. That is more primarily salary-based analysis. It does include some consideration of overall benefits. I think, I take your point, every municipal employee has a very, by any other kind of objective standard in the rest of the world, has a very, in South Carolina, has a very generous retirements benefits package, for example. Far exceeds that in the private sector and most other public sector employees. Now, that's true for every public sector employee in South Carolina, but we're trying to do some benchmarking against some private sector entities as well, and that's when you start getting into apples and oranges comparison. Then, I think has been noted, I think the Councilmember Berner did raise an issue about paid time off. As he believes, his view was, and again, this may come up later, and he can express this, that our paid time off benefits are very generous. I think you get 4 or 5 weeks in your first year of service, which again, is much higher than you generally see in other sectors. We also
More than double. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. We have a tuition benefits program. We have other benefits and incentives as well. And I'm not yet, kind of to your point, completely comfortable, but where we are in the totality. We are where we are, and I don't want to suggest we want to start taking away any benefits that are currently provided to staff at all, but I think we need to be judicious before we further enhance benefits until we have kind of an understanding of the totality of the compensation benefits and fringes packages.
I think so too, and I'm on exactly the same page, and there may be more valuable benefits that we'd want to give that enhance the quality of the package versus just giving health care. The other thing about this, and for your benefit, we don't have the graph showing the history, do we? But healthcare costs for the town have increased about 50% over the last 5 or 6 years, where the employees' contribution is either not increased or it's gone up a very little. So the way it's working now is we're taking on all the burden of, or virtually all the burden of, the cost increase of healthcare, which is totally fine by me because it's a benefit we should provide, but I don't want to provide personally any additional until we look at the value proposition of all the other benefits the town's getting and where we want and where does the town want to, where the employees, what's valuable to those guys. So,
Is retention an issue?
No.
Had one recent employee pursue another opportunity. But that's been kind of it, other than retirements or health-related issues.
Have we ever surveyed the employees to find out which of the benefits they find most valuable?
What we've done, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, under 2 mayors ago, I believe, we did put together a staff committee, which is more senior staff, to essentially discuss what staff would want, and we made that recommendation. One of the things that came out of it was wanted to increase, well, at the time, we wanted to increase tuition, which council approved another tuition increase. We also, the recommendation was to, right now, there's, the town provides optional retirement. And so there was a max amount, I believe, before when we started, maybe it was 2,000, I remember, but that went up. We've asked for that to increase even more, but it hasn't, but we did receive an increase there. There were some other things that we had asked, and I know one of the things was gym membership, but we didn't get that. I don't remember, I know Jim Jordan and Dorota was also part of that. But other than that.
Stephanie, is retirement at our discretion, or is that a state?
State.
Right.
Yes. So
But
we
we
have
also
two.
have
There's
optional,
there's requirement, we have two. There's a state mandated one, and then there's an optional one. So the state mandate dictates how much has to come out of their
And
salary.
that's into the state retirement fund. We also provide a contribution to the 401K.
Correct, but that's the optional.
That's optional.
Yeah, but to answer your question, we did do it one time about 4 years ago.
What is our current 401K match?
3,000. 3,000, up to 3,000.
Max.
And is that
For the
dollar for
optional.
dollar, or?
Yes, $1 for up to 3,000. 100% up to 3,000.
Great, super.
I do think that's a great question. What do the employees see most valuable? That'd be an interesting consideration of what benefits them. And I know there's a cross-section of employees, some with families, some nearing retirement. You know, some drive a long distance, some drive a short distance. You know, the different things that would incentivize them. I'm mindful of retention also, and what's that look like, and then the benchmarking to what other communities would do. I'm mindful Q is a little bit more of a drive. If you want to live closer, it's more expensive. I think we're lucky to have long tenured employees with great experience, and don't want to mess that up too much. But I do think we need to look at the more complete package as well. I'm familiar with both the federal and the corporate medical plans, and over both my careers, watched how costs and burdens have shifted, complemented by retirement, which just came up as well. So I think it's a more complex discussion, but I don't want to take anything away while we're figuring that out.
Well, we'll certainly commit from a town administration standpoint to put together a memo for all council members that outlines and quantifies all the existing benefits that we provide. And then that could probably be supplemented by some additional survey of staff as to what benefits they deem to be most valuable to them.
So do I have a motion, or do I table this, or what would the committee like to do?
I would move that we pursue the option that maintains the status, that we approve the option that maintains the status quo at this point in time.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
I just want to clarify now. So do we use the current, because those rates are effective January 1st. So we currently do 2080, and we have the amounts. But the 2080 amounts for next year are going to be a little different. But we continue 2080 with the rates from 2025, right? That's what we
For
want to
next year,
do.
yeah, that's
Okay.
the rates.
And just one thing, so the other information that we're gonna look at the full package and all, we're gonna do it during budget season, like in March, right? That's where we, for the, to look at the comprehensive benefit package, do you want to do it at the budget time?
During the budget
Well,
process.
in
Right.
conjunction, I think in
Yes.
With the
conjunction with
budget.
the budget, that would
Okay.
certainly be appropriate.
Okay, so we'll do in March.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly start putting that together and provide information in advance
Okay.
of the
Yeah.
budget consideration. But yes,
Yeah.
I think that's in conjunction.
Okay.
Approving any adjustments to the compensation package in conjunction with approval of the next year's budget would seem to
Okay.
be appropriate.
I don't know if it's a workshop agenda item, perhaps, target for that, so we can dig into it more. I don't know what
Well,
the-
we can certainly have it as part of our strategic planning session. So overall, employee recruitment and retention strategies could be part of our January, February strategic planning meetings.
What we did before, and I would suggest this again, is we broke the employees into, there's kind of a natural break point, the lower paid and the higher paid, and look at the two groups.
Okay.
Don't look at any individuals. And
Okay.
don't look at it as a whole, because there's such a gradation. So if we can do that, is that okay with everybody?
Okay,
Same thing then.
sounds good, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, next on the agenda is to review the engagement agreement for Maynard Nexus for legal services pertaining to a new development agreement with the resort.
This was on the last Ways and Means and Council agenda. It was deferred because Councilmember Berner had raised some legitimate questions about the procedure for considering essentially a sole sourced agreement and wanted additional information or documentation about the bona fides of the individual and the firm. Those have subsequently been provided to council members. I believe everybody's had a chance to look at that. The one thing I will provide a further update on is I went back and had some additional discussions with the lawyer and the firm, and was able to negotiate, because their rates are higher than we've paid elsewhere, that we've been able to negotiate additional 20% reduction in the rates that were specified in the draft agreement that's in the materials. So that will be reflected. The other thing that council pointed out was that, and I'm not sure if the staff has the town has done this in the past, but the council indicated that it is customary for municipalities to get, to seek and obtain reimbursement for consulting fees in association, which include attorney's fees in association with negotiation, drafting and negotiation of development agreements. Yeah, well. Yeah, from the developer. And he pointed to Charleston County and, who all here? Most jurisdictions we work with obtain reimbursement for reasonable consultant-related costs, including attorney fees in conjunction with negotiation and drafting development agreements. Examples are Charleston County, Mount Pleasant, Dorchester County, and City of Hardeeville. So. Okay. And other governmental entities have a sizable application fee for development agreement applications, Somerville and Berkeley County, which I don't believe we have anything in our ordinance. So that's something that, those are two issues we might want to look at. But in any event, I would move that we, the Ways and Means Committee, recommend to council the retention of George Bullwinkle and the firm of Maynard Nexon to provide specialized legal services with regard to the drafting and negotiation of any development agreement with the resort.
Can I ask a question before we make the motion?
You do that during discussion. We need a second, and then we discuss it.
Okay, second.
Now, discussion?
Who was that provided that added detail that you just read? Maynard?
Yes,
Yeah,
the lead partner for Maynard Nixon, who was the individual recommended by both our town attorney and our outside counsel. You weren't at prior meetings, you may have been sitting in the audience, but they both, somewhat surprisingly, because they're turning down business, represented that neither they nor their firms, in their own view, had the requisite expertise.
We have two examples of two attorneys getting along and having the same recommendation.
Yes, yes, and neither one of them to pay them or their firms more money. They were suggesting that there are really two individuals that have this specialized expertise in South Carolina, and one is has been retained by the resort and Kiowa Partners. So this is the other individual, and he had passed a conflicts check.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Will this firm be involved in the discussions that occur at the Planning Commission level? Because I am assuming this process will start at Planning Commission before it comes to council?
Before it comes to council, the expectation is that the administration, I and staff, will sit down with the leadership of the resort and their teams and legal to discuss the potential framework for a development agreement. The number of issues that we've identified as potential, quid pro quo-weighted issues, potential changes from the current development agreement, as well as any other changes or we might want to incorporate in a development agreement that is less perhaps one-sided than prior development agreements have been, at least in my view, more favorable to the developer, in part because the agreements have been drafted by Developers Council. But all of that is just table setting. There's no agreement, and the process would be that any application would be submitted first to the Planning Commission and reviewed by the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission would make a recommendation ultimately to the Town Council, and the Town Council would then have the ultimate decision-making authority with respect to whether or not to enter into a development agreement and the terms of that development agreement.
I'm
So
just
a public hearing process.
I'm wondering if somebody from the Planning Commission shouldn't be involved in that first step, with the administration, because they're bringing a different look at things, a different perspective.
I would respectfully suggest kind of the more cooks early in the process makes it a little bit more complicated. The Planning Commission and all Planning Commission members will have essentially a blank slate. I mean, they can start from scratch. So their different perspective will be fully reflected in their review process. And they can undertake, as many meetings as they want to, public hearings, et cetera. So there are no constraints whatsoever on the Planning Commission's review of the development agreement under our ordinances, regardless of what I or the administration might recommend as a useful starting point for discussion.
Okay.
I'm
I'm curious as to your perspective.
I hear what Madeline is saying, and I'd like to talk about this a little bit more, because I can see there being a benefit. Let's say the administrative has 4 or 5 big hot buttons. It'd be great for the Planning Commission to know that as they go in, so they know the rationale behind kind of the direction that is started with. So it might be worthwhile to have somebody there, maybe not to participate necessarily, but to understand the rationale, be the courier of that rationale to the Planning Commission as they go forward. And you wouldn't have to, a lot of the legal stuff that we get at the very first round might not need to be re-given. Might be a cost savings too, if the Planning Commission person could interpret that and bring that to light.
So I would say that it has been the case, and I would fully anticipate would continue to be the case, that there would be kind of regular ongoing organic discussions with individual members of the Planning Commission about various of these issues and their concerns. The problem is we've got to be fealty to the State Open Meetings Act and the Planning Commission process itself. The Planning Commission involvement is a public process. Open meetings. The council's consideration of the development agreement is subject to the Open Meetings Act, and it's a public process as well. There are no constraints, although I would certainly intend to generally communicate what we are thinking about in me as mayor or members of the staff or working with an applicant to talk about the potential potential process and substance of a framework for a development agreement. If we start institutionally involving the Planning Commission, then and or the council members, that starts to change that a little bit. And I don't know quite, you know.
Mayor,
Yes.
maybe a little bit, as we were talking about this and looking at the development agreement and talking with the attorney, really, I almost kind of see the development agreement as two pieces. One of the things that our attorney and the mayor and staff, when we work with the resort on the development agreement, what you're really looking at in negotiating is really the terms of it. The other piece that we talk about, the Planning Commission, that really comes where John is working with maybe Mark Permar, and then they're submitting an application to go to the Planning Commission. So really, this development agreement is really kind of in two pieces, and the piece that you're referring to, that you talk with Roger and through our legal, is really just defining just kind of the legal terms of the development agreement. Is that correct? And then eventually, the piece that really becomes public in the Planning Commission is what Mr. Taylor and the Planning Commission work on, which would be the chair. Is that kind of how maybe it can be kind of sliced so that the chair gets involved?
The lines
early
will
on?
obviously be blurred. I would suspect that the Planning Commission as a body, and even this body as a body, would not get quite as involved in public meetings, certainly in some executive sessions, in some of the legal, details. I mean, there's a lot of just definitional, defining the property, understanding, whether in fact the applicable duration of a development agreement under the state.
Setbacks, height restrictions,
Well, setbacks and heights and those kinds of things are actually what would be the clear province of the planning commission. Some of the other stuff that we've seen issues arise in the prior development agreement, for example, with Kiowa Partners. All of that, a lot of that stuff is not really, would not be best considered or addressed in the context of a planning commission process.
And then just, and this is also a possibility, what we've done in the past in regards to the chair and co-chair of the Planning Commission, is at some point, whenever the mayor felt appropriate, they have been brought in and apprised of kind of the process before an application is submitted. So at least you have the chair and the co-chair is aware, understanding that they're not voting on anything, they're just obviously being apprised. So during the meetings, they will have a little bit of general knowledge. That has been done in the past.
And one of the things that every time I sit down with any external constituent, whether it's the resort or anybody else, and have any discussions about issues that may come before the Planning Commission or the council, is our discussions are simply that can we create a basis for, my, as mayor, willingness to recommend something to the Planning Commission and then ultimately to the council, understanding that there is no actual agreement on the part of the town
So
with regard to anything.
would next steps with this, assuming we approve this today, the decision on the table to bring on council, would the next steps be either council or planning commission, or maybe a joint meeting, of John or the council to come in and tell us what the process
We're
is?
a long way from submitting for them submitting an application for a development agreement. This is all preliminary to that process.
I was just wondering if there's a template on how this moves forward, would that be helpful to inform council and the planning commission of,
Well, there are.
or is there no straight line path?
Again, kind of my expectation is that I and staff and legal, and particularly kind of legal, will sit down with the resort, and one of the primary principal issues will be, do we use the current development agreement as a template? It's got a lot of legal boilerplate, a lot of legal language in there. There was a lot of back and forth between the prior town attorney and the developer's attorney in that. I had a lot of questions about that, some of them saying, no, why would we agree to this, et cetera. But that was a lot of the legalistic stuff. And what we're going to start with is, okay, do we use this as a template, or do we want a blank slate of paper, and then start working through all of that and coming up with the basic terms of a development agreement that, again, for the lack of a better way to say it, appropriately balances the competing interest and considerations of the two parties. So ultimately, a development agreement is intended to be mutually beneficial, and clearly so. My concern has always been the prior development agreements were a little, maybe more than a little, too one-sided. And as the town administrator noted, the town had never retained outside counsel. It simply used its town attorney, and questions whether town attorneys in the past had really deep expertise in development agreement related issues, where clearly the developers council does. So it's kind of doing all that basic blocking and tackling, and then being able to come forward with, say, here's something that, at the end of the day, if you want to submit this application, I'm certainly willing, as the mayor or as the chief administrative officer of the town, to say, I think this is a useful starting point for discussion. Here's all the things we've tried to take into consideration, but now the ball is yours. And
Who's yours?
the planning commissions.
All right, well, number one, when do you expect this process to kick into gear?
So, good question, and I really don't know. I actually have lunch scheduled with Mr. Warren later this week. This is one of the things we'll talk about. He had approached the town actually 3 or 4 months ago about trying to kickstart the process on a new development agreement. But somewhat surprisingly, there were some things we had to get through, other issues we were dealing with, and had to get, and also was working through these issues with our current council, and haven't really heard anything more from him during that time. So there's been no pressure applied whatsoever to say, can we really sit down and get this process rolling? I don't know the answer to that. My operating assumption, it's been simply that, that's not more, it's a little bit more what he had signaled, but also had been my assumption that they would want a new development agreement in part to be able to develop at least the West Beach area in advance of the next PGA tournament, which is in 2031. And you talk multiple months to go through the development agreement process, multiple months, and then you start the permitting processes. And now, so, you need to, if you're going to get something, if you want to do something before 2031, you're going to have to get started here fairly soon. Now, he was having meetings up in Richmond with the family members, with that owns the resort, and when he talked about and I think he said this at the public meeting, his State of the Resort address, that they showed some concepts or ideas with regard to West Beach. To my knowledge, there have been no plans, and he's not mentioned any plans with regard to East Beach at all at this point in time. Whether the circumstances have changed with regard to West Beach or not, I don't know, but that's one of the things.
Can he develop West Beach in the absence of a new development
Yes,
agreement?
yes, yeah.
Okay, and I'm not going to belabor this point, but I think Luke raised some really good ancillary points on the value of Planning Commission being involved earlier in the process than perhaps you had initially explored. So just something to keep an open mind about.
And again, the Planning Commission, I want to be careful here.
I wouldn't say the commission,
That's
I'd say
it.
a representative.
Exactly. One
And
representative.
certainly, I would anticipate,
A liaison.
ongoing discussion or dialogue about kind of the full range, particularly the bigger picture issues. What are the kind of the big issues that the Planning Commission is going to be likely most interested in, and having those reflected and incorporated in any kind of framework that would be part of, be incorporated in the application that would be submitted.
Yeah, I would ask you to think about it. I think it could only be valuable for a single representative from the Planning Commission to participate. And while John is going to have the knowledge, I thought he walked in, John's going to have the knowledge of all the specifics around kind of the zoning code and heights and what we do currently. I think the community voice about what the community might want early on in the process probably wouldn't hurt. You're still going to drive the bus, but I think that it can't help but have somebody else listening and thinking about different things than you're going to be thinking about, or that John or Stephanie or whoever you'd be thinking about. So something to consider.
There could be too many cooks, but if it's the right cook.
That's,
then
no,
add to it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there will, at the very least, there will be ongoing discussion and dialogue, and whether involvement in every single meeting or not, I won't necessarily commit to that, but.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have a motion. Any more discussion?
No, I agree with the discussion that just happened.
All right, we'll vote. All in favor of entertaining and hiring Maynard Nexus for our legal
Recommending to
representation?
town council the
Recommending to
retention.
town council for our legal services related to the resort development agreement. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, passed unanimous. On to new business. The first new business, Dorada's going to talk about the SATAX recommendations for November from our recent meeting about 3 weeks ago.
Yes, we had an additional meeting, or originally the committee met in April to recommend the funding for this current fiscal year. However, we had some more money in the pool and want to wait until we collect 2 quarters of this year to see if this number is accurate. And with $1 additional million for this year, we had a meeting a couple years ago, and a couple weeks ago, and we have 7 applicants that the application total about $600,000. Those are pretty much the same applicants that we've seen in the past. And that's the norm for now. But anyway, every applicant have a great presentation. The committee voted on, they recommended funding, and that's the very last column is what they recommending to fund. This is the average of individual proposed funding for all the members. And we're asking now that you recommend what they, or recommend to town council and approval those amounts, or you can change them if you like.
The only thing I would add before we entertain motions is there was a bit of a discussion about kind of the philosophy of contributing to marketing budgets that might otherwise appear to enhance the profitability of firms. So there was a takeaway to think about and survey all the members about what the philosophy was. If they're using SATAX to supplement their advertising budget, or where they're using SATAX to replace their advertising budget so their profitability remains the same. There's a very good discussion kind of both ways on that. The other thing we talked about was something new, which was expanding the wildlife effort for signage and even going further for the dolphins at the far end of Captain Sam Spit. That was a very modest request that the person was encouraged to think more broadly about that. And then the last thing was, as we thought about kind of what we were trying to do with SATAX money with regard to drones, I guess, and how we were supposed to use the money to purchase capital equipment, and whether the town should purchase it or whether we should allow a vendor to purchase it. And I think where we came at was the town should really purchase it, and it's important in the contract to specify the uses for it so that it didn't violate SATAX rules. So there's a contract issue is probably more important. But the purchasing of capital equipment should be done by the town and then leased for some nominal fee to any organizations we use for anything, but including kind of video equipment for safety and surveillance for swimmers and the visitors to the island. So with that being said,
If I could just comment on the first point you made, Mr. Chairman, which is for kind of direct marketing of an entity as opposed to general tourism promotion.
Yep.
I had that kind of continuing concern as well. It's come up in some other, say, tax-related meetings, as we learn from the CVB, where a substantial portion of the state accommodations tax goes. They don't provide they don't promote any individual institution or organization or facility. They're promoting the region, they're promoting, towns, et cetera, try to increase tourists generally. They're not substituting marketing budget dollars for a private organization.
I've got a question about just the spreadsheet. Make sure I'm reading it correctly.
Sure.
And I'll just look at the last column where the SATAX committee funding recommendation totals out to 535,945. Available funds, $1 million. Excess funds, 464,055. Does that mean we still have money on the table?
Correct. It will, and if it's not spent, it can roll over to the next year. We have 2 years to spend the money.
So does that mean, is that cumulative of those 3 columns? We still have that amount of money left?
Correct. For this, yeah, for this.
Is there a reason we did the cut line where we did the cut line then?
So
say that again,
Is
please.
there a reason we did the cutoff line where we did the cutoff line? Did they just not think that the applications?
You mean the recommended versus
not
the
recommended.
request versus approved?
Mr. Chairman, would you entertain a motion for approval of the SATAX committee recommendations to
would.
Waste Management? So moved.
Need a second? Okay. Now discussion.
I'll learn
The
this.
answer is, so the SATAX committee is made up of a group of folks who have a vested interest in how the money's spent. The resort, NLN, other entities, and individuals on the island. What happens is the presentations are made, what they're going to do with the money, how they're going to spend it, when they're going to spend it, and then the committee votes to allocate the money. I don't vote, nobody on the town votes, it's the committee votes, and then the town approves it. So it's, what do the rest of the committee members think about the presentation, the use of funds, is it appropriate, is it sized right? And they'll come back and resize it or based on their vote, and then Dorada totals it, and then that's what the ultimate recommendation is from the SATAX committee to us and then to the town council.
That's helpful, thank you. So,
some of the members didn't feel some of the projects need to be funded fully.
Gotcha, okay.
as requested. And since this is the average, it's not the discussion, it's an individual average, hence the numbers are not what was requested.
So it's based off the merit of the package versus
To a
spending the
great
money?
extent.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yes.
This may be an odd angle, and so if it is, got it. But, I'm looking at stuff like, in line of the marketing discussion. We're all familiar with the community voice, granted it's IKEA, but it's a voice, about fresh fields and affordable places to eat. And I've heard secondhand that, as leases are expiring, the rents are going up. And there's some small businesses that own in fresh fields that may or may not continue to be there and enhance that location as a tourist and a community location. And the benchmark I look at is Old Town Alexandria, Virginia, where I used to live, that everybody raised the rents and all the local businesses went away, and now we've got the stuff you find in a shopping mall. So is there an angle where state tax money can be used to try to encourage Edens to be more favorable in their rents because we're helping them with expenses of marketing through state tax? I don't know. I mean, it's kind of convoluted, but is there something there with that could benefit the community and tourism?
I'll share after the meeting, I'll share the state tax regulation with you so you can read through that. But I think the short answer is that's probably a bridge too far. It's really not.
Probably what?
to-
A bridge too far. he said.
Bridge too far. It's really to encourage tourism broadly. It's not to make businesses healthy so tourists can come there. If the business can stand on its own, and we can do something to bring more tourists there, that's one approach. And maybe sound very subtle, but I think that's different from lowering rent so it can be affordable for a business to be there. But I'll give you the regulations to read and we can have a greater
Yeah, it
discussion.
is. I pulled it up. I'm not going to read all of it, but it says the funds received by a county municipality, which is a high concentration of tourism activity, may be used to provide additional county and municipal services, including but not limited to law enforcement, traffic control, public facilities, and highway and street maintenance, as well as the continual promotion of tourism. And then it says tourism, then there's a list of tourism-related expenditures that are specifically identified that are allowed expenditures. But
Probably the ones that Dorada has on this bottom of this.
yeah, it would not, like, I think the chairman is right, that's a bridge too far. There actually is a specific thing for the development of workforce housing. They've included that, but this kind of general benefit, smaller businesses, I don't see that as something that neatly fits into what is allowed for accommodation tax purposes. But just generally to address your question or concern, I don't want to speak for Edens, but I know the leadership and have periodic conversations with them. There are some, I think there was some misinformation circulated in Iowa. There is one particular lease that was not renewed by the tenant, and that is a restaurant property, but just one. That's my understanding, or that's what I've been told. As to kind of what's going to happen with other homegrown, or local based service providers or shops. The one thing is somewhat unique about Edens. If you're familiar with the Union Market in Washington, D.C., that's an Edens owned property, as well as others. They have an ethos, and it has been advanced throughout all of their projects in trying to have a good mix of local and national brands and creating kind of a sense of place and community. Whether the economics of this particular property, lend themselves to what they've done elsewhere and in the past, at the end of the day, I don't really know. But they've certainly expressed that commitment to try to have a real mix of local service providers as well as well-known national brands.
I appreciate your thoughts, thanks.
And just maybe one other anecdotal piece to this is, assuming we're talking about the same entity that's leaving because of the apparent rates, that entity has been for sale going back for over 2 years. So they were looking for an exit strategy for quite a while now. And this
Interesting.
maybe just forced the issue.
That's helpful. I was looking forward versus looking back on other things I'm hearing, but I don't know how accurate the things I'm hearing are, so.
Any other discussion on the SATAX recommendations?
Well, I want to comment on the one observation you made, that we have the same repeat customers. And we need to continue to look for ways, do a better job of outreach to expand the potential, organizations and entities that can, come forward with an application that does fall, not just, some case clearly, maybe you have to stretch a little bit, but it wouldn't be a bridge too far within the tourism-related expenditures. And Councilmember Spencer, what I would note is, for example, one of the broadest is promotion of the arts and cultural events. Now, so that's where Freshfields can get promotion, because they do a lot of events.
Garden
Where
and all that.
the resort is promoting less staying at the sanctuary than they are their big events, which do draw in a lot of tourists and visitors.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Just one piece of information, it is also explicitly allowed for state tax money to do beach renourishment. And so, I don't know if you noticed in here, there is a permit for the beach renourishment program that we're kicking off, and it'll go over the next 2 years for permitting, but then the permit will allow us to go into 5 years. So we're trying to get ahead of something by doing this, and again, state tax money allows us to do the beach renourishment.
Thank you.
Okay. If there are no other comments, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Any opposed or abstentions? Okay. The second piece of new business, the last piece, is for a review and recommendation to the town council for the proposed comprehensive landscape and maintenance and related services. Brian?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Ways and Means Committee. So as you all know, the town uses a third-party contractor to provide landscape services for all town-owned trees, shrubs, landscape beds along the Parkway, Beachwalker Drive, and the municipal complex. Our current contractor that we use is Artigues Landscape Maintenance to perform these services, and they've been our contractor since January 1st, 2022. They were awarded a 3-year contract, which will organically expire at the end of this year. Since this contract is terminating, the town staff released an RFP for landscape services and maintenance to firms to provide bids for this contract. We had an RFP that was released to solicit these bids. We received 7 bids back from various contractors. It was posted publicly on our website and on various other platforms. And we got 7 bids back. The bids ranged from the low end, $156,920, up to $256,030 annually. All of these bids were carefully reviewed by a team of 5 review members. We reviewed the price. We looked at their maintenance schedule to make sure that it was consistent with what we asked for in the RFP, as well as the mulch and pine straw applications, and also reporting on the irrigation system regularly to town staff. After reviewing all of the bids and meeting and subsequent discussion after meeting, the town staff is going to be recommending to the Ways and Means Committee that we award this contract to Artigues Landscape Maintenance, again, who is our current contractor. One thing that I would like to note that came into play with this recommendation is that when Artigues first got this contract, we had a dedicated representative from Artigues, who's Ron, who's in the audience with us today. He will returned to be our point of contact. We did see a lot of really great productivity, proactive maintenance, and enhancement on the Parkway, Beachwalker Drive, and the municipal complex while he was our point of contact. He, for the latter part of this contract, he was not our main point of contact. I will be transparent. We did see a couple of things that were issues with some of the service that we were getting in the latter part of our contract. But again, we will be appointed him as our point of contact for the duration of the contract if they are to be awarded this contract again. So again, we will be recommending Artigue's Landscape Maintenance to be the service provider for the landscape. And if this is approved, this will be funded 70% through restricted funds and 30% through the general fund. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions that you all might have, and then also anything specific to Artigue's as a firm. Ron is available to answer any questions that you might have as well.
What's the term of this contract?
I'm sorry?
What is the term?
How
How many years?
It would be a 3-year contract.
It
Well-
it will not be a 3-year contract.
I'm sorry?
It will not be a 3-year contract.
Okay. Well, so
We need to,
The-
we need to negotiate, they will need to execute. This is approval of, the recommendation from the staff with regard to the RFP process. One of the requirements is to enter into a contract that fits the form of the town's municipal contract. So that is still a further step that would need to be taken, and my recommendation would not be a 3-year contract. I would note that the last agreement we had is actually contradictory with the current incumbent, which is Artigue's. It said, in one place, it says the contract is for a 12-month period. And then the second place, it says it was for 3 years. We basically, I guess, allowed it to be 3 years, but it said 12 years in one point, 3 years in another. It would be my recommendation that we would be a shorter term than 3 years. Now, whether that's 1 or 2 years, I'm open.
I have a lot of questions. What's the process, procedure?
All right,
think
well,
we need to-
let's get a motion first. We have a motion to approve the recommendation to go to town council for comprehensive landscape maintenance-related services.
So move.
Second.
Okay, now your discussion, your questions.
So the evaluation consisted of 3 criteria, but I only see one of them. Can we see what the scoring was for the other 2 criteria, since that adds up to 50% of the decision?
I can certainly provide that for you. The 3 criteria that we used were the price of the proposal, the electric equipment plan, and references. I'm not sure, you're only looking at one.
We're only seeing the price, so we don't see the other 2 factors.
Okay, well, I can certainly provide the evaluations that we used.
I think it's germane, because when we're picking the 4th lowest price, and I'm not a lowest price technically acceptable zealot, but I'm familiar with several of these firms on here, including lower priced firms that I think are providing performance in other communities that I think would be acceptable. Not to try to second guess the source selection, I'd like to understand where the
Yeah.
source selection committee's heads were on evaluating this. Were those criteria made available in the RFP so that the bidders knew that that was how they were going to be evaluated?
Yes, the criteria was made available in the RFP, so everyone was aware of that. I will say, so if you take the highest and the lowest, and even the second highest, they were kind of outliers in our opinion. And so taking those other 4 bids, we're looking at a $6,000 difference between those 4 bids, which we thought was pretty appropriate and competitive. And then all of those, so again, the price was really close, but between all of those, because
Well, it was only close between 4 of them.
And I'm not sure that I'd consider the lowest an outlier. I'm not advocating a particular vendor in this discussion here, but I am familiar with the lowest price and have spoken to other communities that use them. They're very happy with them, so. for
Well, and
more
I
than
can speak to
$30,000
that.
more.
I can speak to that
Okay.
too. And this is on behalf of the team that reviewed all of these proposals. The lowest price firm delivered what we thought was a pretty incomplete and not very impressive proposal, and it was missing critical evaluation criteria. And, you know, if we're evaluating based off of what we were given, they did not provide a very compelling proposal. So while their bid might have been very attractive, and were scored high on it across the board, the other evaluation criteria didn't set them apart.
Which would be, what the third evaluation criteria, Brian, is simply recommendations, basically service experience and recommendations. So did they score low on that one?
They were relatively good on that one as well. It was that evaluation criteria and subsequent discussions that we all had. We all in the review committee felt the same, that we weren't, it was just very unimpressive, and it was an incomplete proposal that we all felt we weren't very comfortable with.
If I can throw
providing.
in one thing, I know, again, because we had to go based on the application that was submitted. One of our requirements is that they have electric leaf blowers. They did not address that at all. So initially during our meeting, they would not have they didn't receive any points because our RFP specifically states you have to have electric leaf blowers. I believe Brian called them afterwards, but their application did not speak to that. The only thing their application had was the cost for routine maintenance and also the mulch and pine straw and reference and resume.
Who did-
So that was one of the reasons they didn't get points for that particular category at all.
How were the evaluation criteria determined and who approved them?
The evaluation criteria, at the end of the day, it was reviewed by the mayor.
I
And
was
he-
involved and staff in the
Yeah.
establishment of the criteria.
And the reason I ask, I mean, you know, in my community, when they're blowing every week, I love electric. If they're out on Keel Island Parkway, I'm not so sure I'm as concerned about that.
And fair point, and perhaps I will take some ownership or responsibility or blame, as may be appropriate for that. We have committed to be Kiowa Goes Grain, being a good steward of our environment. It is not my opinion, but it's kind of mathematically a fact, or it's a fact that the two-cycle engine leaf blowers are one of the most polluting devices, pound for pound, on the face of the earth, both noise and air pollution. I literally just got back from Washington, D.C., where over the weekend or last week, when you just have the entire city mandated only electric leaf blowers, the entire city, and it's just a world of difference because the noise level is just dramatically less.
I'm a fan of electric too. I'm just wondering if it's worth more than $30,000 as we balance factors and a less than $200,000
Well,
contract.
but I believe that once there was follow-up, the issue, I think one issue, because here is the complete package, and what Artigues, Land One, Russell, Rupert, Greenery, and Yellowstone, what they all did was provide kind of with lack of a better term, a pretty package. Cover letter, how happy they were to be considered to provide services to Kiowa Island. Some of them did their complete marketing stuff. In fact, some of it was completely unrelated because they had their own maintenance schedule. For example, is what they would do is their own maintenance schedule rather than adhering to the maintenance schedule in the RFP. And some of them addressed electrical. The Greenery said, for example, that they were going to be full electrical with all equipment, from the get-go. I think there may have been one other as well. Pleasant Places, for whatever reason, simply responded to the required forms, which said they're going to comply with the RFP. The RFP requires that you have electric leaf blowers out of the box. They didn't separately say that will use electric leaf blowers, but I believe staff followed up with them and that they will have electric leaf blowers. They don't have other electrical equipment. Some of the RFP respondents did say they have, I think only one, correct me if I'm wrong, had kind of full electrical out of the box, maybe two. I believe Artigue said electrical leaf blowers out of the box, and we'll have essentially a 6-month phase-in. I don't recall specifically for additional smaller maintenance.
So did we ask for a plan, or it's just statement of
You'll have
compliance
to
good
ask,
enough?
whether there was the follow-up. Stephanie and Brian were participating in the review process as to, what the level of follow-up was with regard to each of the applicants with regard to those issues.
And I'm very familiar, as I think you all know, with procurement. And I understand the source selection. You've got to go off the package, not what you see out in the community per se. You've got to learn how to write and respond to the requirement. I'm just questioning, and again, it's more than $30,000 difference on a less than $200,000 contract. Did we ask for them to stay they'd be compliant, which I think you said that the lowest price did, or are we asking for a plan on how to be compliant?
We did ask for a transition plan. It was part of our pre-bid meeting that we had, and it was memorialized in an addendum with questions from the potential offers, and it was stated, give us your plan, and that plan could be, we'll go full electric day one if we're awarded this contract, or there might be a phasing in of electrical equipment, which other firms did provide that, but it was stated to present a transition plan for electrical equipment.
And that's what I'm wrestling with is, can we get to compliance? What happens if we don't approve this today with the contract expiring January 1st?
We'll have Brian and Michael out there mowing the grass. No, I'm just joking. If it's not approved, then the mayor will then, or council can decide if we want to go month to month with our current contractor until we're able to finalize a new contract with someone else.
Part of my experience, and it's both corporate and federal procurements, is they do in RFPs, ENs is the term I'm familiar with, engineering notices. You go back and you ask questions if you think a package is deficient. And this just seems like to get to the lowest price, which I think is in the best interest of the town, this could be resolvable without the markup we're looking at.
Yeah, and one of the things with regards to our RFP, maybe you want to take a look at it. We stated in there that the lowest cost was not necessarily the deciding factor. Now, I'm not saying that that's something that that council can decide, but it was stated that it was not. Some RFPs state through municipal government, it states that the lowest bidder has to be selected. This particular RFP package did not stipulate that, and also during the pre-bid meeting, it was reiterated that the lowest bidder that's not the deciding factor. It's essentially the criteria that was set up, but ultimately, at the end of the day,
necessarily
well,
the
we'll
deciding
just
factor.
say, yeah, end of the day, through Ways and Means recommendation of council, you can decide to go with the lowest bidder and reverse staff's recommendation.
And my question is more towards, and I'm not sure what the state law says, I'm familiar with federal, but when you receive a package, there's an opportunity to go back to bidders and tell them what's deficient in their package so they can
Correct.
improve on it.
Correct.
And so do we have a process, is that allowed under our procurement?
We've done.
And did that happen? Because I think that, I'd like to get us to the lowest bidder if
What
we
we've
can.
done with some bid, to answer your question, yes, we've done that to some. We've had, essentially, we may have the top 2 or top 3. We then have brought them in for interviews to ask additional questions. We have sat down with some to say, okay, well, your costs are very close. Could you willing to negotiate, a cost but to answer your question, yes. Municipalities can do that in the procurement process. We can do it here. It was done to a little bit of degree I would say is that with this, we went to the top 2 and references were called. At the end of the day, this is the recommendation, but yes, if we wanted to go back to include Pleasant Places, they were not the top 3 with this group, but if we wanted to go back and relook, evaluate all of them, we can definitely do that and bring in for interviews. It's however you all like for us to
It's a
proceed.
substantial difference in the cost, considering the value of the contract. And I did call for references myself and got good references on the lowest bidder. So that's part of where my rationale is.
Any other discussion?
One of the reasons I will note, and this won't come as any surprise to Mr. Ortiz, who's in the audience, and the staff, one of the reasons we went out, the current agreement allowed for it to be continued, even though it ended by its terms. I thought it was important to go out with an RFP process, in part to see if we could get a better value proposition. But also, I've had some, for the last 2+ years, but looking at my notes, clear line of communications with the current incumbent service provider and staff with, concerns about its adherence to the current contract terms. And so those have been ongoing issues that were part of the reason we decided to go out with a new RFP. And I'd had a meeting with Mr. Ortiz here in the office, a couple in the field, and suffice to say, I had continuing concerns about adherence to the contract terms in the first instance, and then appropriate follow-up. What I will say is that had certainly been true over a lengthy period of time. There's been a market change, and I don't know if that's because Mr. Ortiz has gotten more directly involved himself over the last 3 or so months, a market improvement in the services that were provided. Whether that's because he's taken more ownership over or because this was going out with an RFP and they wanted to put their best foot forward, who really knows? So the bottom line is, I still have my concerns that the incumbent did not adhere to the terms of the contract for lengthy periods of time, with regard to coming up 3 times a week, picking up trash, not throwing debris into the right-of-way, into the tree line, et cetera, seeing that in person. So those were ongoing concerns. He's demonstrated, or the firm has demonstrated more recently, that they're fully capable of carrying out all the terms of the agreement because they've done so more recently. Whether that warrants a $30,000 price difference or not, that's something that council as a whole will have to determine. One thing I will note is that, at least while I'm mayor, any agreement can be canceled for convenience of the municipality. We've done an inadequate job, perhaps in the past, of managing or monitoring contract performance, not just with regard to this as well as others, and whoever the town selects, at the end of the day, I'm highly confident will live up to the terms of the contract, and if they don't, contract will be terminated for convenience, pretty forthrightly, and we'll start this process again.
Any other discussion? I will move to a vote to put forward to the town council the recommendation to hire comprehensive landscape maintenance and related services, with the caveat that it'll be annually, not a 3-year contract. Is that what I heard?
Maybe I'm out of process. Can we ask staff to revisit helping the lower bidders be more compliant and score better?
There's a pending motion. You can certainly move to amend the motion or move to table consideration of the motion, and that being the basis therefore.
So I move to amend the motion to ask staff to meet with the respondents to try to get us to one of the lower bidders.
Accept the amendment.
But before seconding the amendment, can I pose a question?
Sure.
Is it to try to get see if everybody will come back with a lower bid? Or is it to have follow-up with each of the applicants to say, is this your best and final bid? That's a standard process in federal government as well in private sector. And also, by the way, can you provide additional detail and clarity with regard to your electrical equipment use out of the box and plan?
That's where my thinking is that we go back and explain why they're deficient and ask them if they can improve on it.
Just regarding like,
May I ask a quick
regarding the
question?
price,
Can I ask a quick question? I'm not sure in federal government. If we wanted to do that, I get it, but now all of this is public, so everyone knows what everyone bidded. So I guess then we could say,
It would just be the other two criteria.
yeah, because then everyone has seen the bid, so I guess they can say, well, yeah, our, Pleasant Place is 158. Maybe they can say come at 154, but they've all now. So I'm not sure, when you do that in federal, maybe the bids are still sealed.
They're still sealed.
But now this is now public.
That's a
Yeah.
fair point.
So
That
maybe
is a fair
consider
point.
that.
And frankly, in the future, if we have three criteria, I'd like to see the scoring for all three criteria so that we can better consider.
Accept the amendment. That's up to you.
Well, the question, we may end up in the same place.
You have a second, you can ask for the vote. If it fails, it goes back to your first.
yeah.
If you don't get a second to his amendment.
Let me ask one more question. Did we go back, when we found the RFP for Pleasant, was it deficient? Did you go back to them and ask to answer the questions where it was deficient?
we went back and asked them to confirm whether or not they would start the contract with electric blowers as mandated, and they responded affirmatively, but there was no plan provided to transition to full electric equipment. What I received from them was quite literally screenshots of electric equipment from a website with no context provided,
So they said they'd be compliant on day one, though.
with the required electric leaf blower mandate. But everything else was not clear on how they would implement that, if at all.
Doesn't seem that hard. If they say they're going to be compliant, bring electric leaf blowers.
Right, but
Lance, I
the
can't
goal
hear
was
you.
to
Oh, I'm
get to
sorry.
all electric equipment. The goal is to get to all electric equipment, and we wanted to catalyze that by mandating electric leaf blowers from day one. It's easy, and those are the most probably used in
Well,
noisy
but on the
equipment.
other hand, so trying to parse that, one bidder who's in exactly that price point, I think $1,000 difference from the recommendation, indicated all electrical equipment from day one. Correct?
Yes,
Okay. Whereas the incumbent said leaf blowers from day one, 6-month transition to electrical for smaller equipment. So then the question becomes, to the point that Councilmember Spencer's raised, what was the scoring? What would have been the scoring on electrical, for example, those two applicants?
Yeah, it was still a high score. We thought that that was a really appropriate transition for,
What I'm saying is, one would have to get 30.
If Pleasant Places.
No, I'm not talking about Pleasant Places. I'm
greenery?
Yeah, I'm talking about,
So the only requirement was the electric leaf blowers. They all would have gotten the same high score if they're able to demonstrate that they would start at day one, or if they currently had them now. The other equipment was not a requirement. It was something that we would like
it could
to
still be
aspire
reflected in
to.
the scoring.
To aspire to. So the only thing in terms of when we looked at the scoring based on our sheet was really the electric leaf blowers, because that was the only thing that we required to start at day one.
Well, but Stephanie, with all due respect, that doesn't make much sense, because either you get all the points or zero. It would seem to me that,
Well, I just said they got all the points.
pardon?
I just said they received all the points.
But that gives no credit to somebody that says, if our part of saying, please provide a transition plan, we'd like to go all electrical equipment, the only entity that should have gotten all the points for electrical is the greenery, because they're 100% electrical out of the box. Then our Teagues would have gotten 25 points or 15 points because they're electrical on leaf blowers out of the box, and they're going to be electrical on within 6 months on smaller equipment. They can't get as good a score as on electrical as the greenery, because the greenery is 100% electrical out of the box, if that was an evaluation criteria. It was an evaluation criteria.
It was, but I just respectfully disagree. The way that we looked at it was on day one, because we did not say.
That was a mandatory. That's simply a mandatory.
It's mandatory, so we
Yeah.
said. So I guess the question back to you, I guess, would be, when we're looking at this, on day one, when the contract is signed, if they have electric, because we looked at it as the fact of the matter, if they have electric leaf blowers, they have met our requirement.
They've
We
met a
don't-
requirement.
yeah.
That doesn't mean they get necessarily 30 points in the
okay,
scoring evaluation
But the way
process.
that we did, and the way that we looked at it as was, if in fact on day one, they can start with electric leaf blowers, they got the points. Now, I hear what you're saying, I'm just referring to how we did it, and that's how we came up with ours. If we try to sit here now and redo our scoring, I mean, that's not something that we want to do, and not unless we want to. I think the question is, do you guys only approve month to month and we go back to the drawing board?
I'm confused, though, because I feel like I've heard different things, and maybe I'm just getting confused. But it seems like the only thing that was really required was electric leaf blowers on day one,
That was
which
correct.
the lowest bidder said they would do.
All except for one all except for one did not specify, or maybe we overlooked it and we called and found out later. But yes, the only requirement in RFP was that on day one, you have the electric leaf blowers. So, in addition, we put in there that we would, love to expire if you can go to other electric equipment, but it was not required. It wasn't a requirement. So some, like the mayor said, the greenery, they currently have all electric equipment. RT stated that they will meet our requirement on day one and have electric leaf blowers. In 6 months, the smaller equipment will go electric, and in 1 year, the larger electric equipment. Some other companies who didn't have electric leaf blowers said in day one, we will have electric leaf blowers. They then got the score.
So the lowest bidder can also be compliant on electric on day one,
They should also be compliant on day one. But when we were sitting down reviewing the application.
and they said they would be.
they just didn't
They
provide that.
They did not provide.
But you subsequently got the information, so
after
then
that.
the way, I'm just trying to understand the team's evaluation process. So all of the bidders would have gotten all the points for electric, all of them. And then Pleasant Places would have gotten 50 points for price, and the lowest bidder would get the best score on price.
That's where I'm headed.
Well, what I did, so everyone could have done it that way, but what I did was, because.
You
well,
did, or the group did?
I'm saying how I did, because each person scored differently. So I'm talking about how I scored. So based on how you set up the scoring, you had us give 50 points.
Yep.
So what I did was, because there were two separate, you had the routine maintenance and then you had the pine straw and mulch. What I did was I just essentially said you get 25 for one and 25 for the other. That's just how I did it.
Okay.
And then I just went down, but
that's not
ultimately
the
it's
group.
50 points.
That's how you
yeah.
did it. But
So, right.
one would think that the lowest bidder would get 50 points. The next four, who were very close, would have gotten 40 points, and the others wouldn't have gotten 20 or 30 or less. And then it comes down to how you scored references.
And that was my question about evaluation criteria, is if you're compliant with the RFP, with the only requirement of the RFP, I would think you'd get 30 points. If you're judging compliance with the RFP at 20 points, or it's individually based, how is that expressed in the RFP?
Well,
Because
how's expressed?
if the nice-to-haves and the not required items get points, I don't know how that would have been articulated so the
Well, but I
respondent could be
think,
successful.
so what I'm hearing though is, right now, the committee, we're not going to change our score right here, but what we could probably do, from what I'm hearing, is that if there's flawed, if you guys believe there's flawed in the way that we evaluate it, it could be that you guys recommend to council that you just go on a month-to-month basis and we go back to the drawing board. Because the question I think that you guys are saying to us is, maybe how did you do your scoring? Maybe we didn't do it the correct way, even though we felt like we did, but maybe we need to be able to have a sheet so you guys can actually see all the scores, we can be able to justify. But I think right now, doing the fact of saying, well, you should have done this way, as a committee, we're not going to sit here and say, okay, well, we now change our recommendation. This is we're trying to explain why.
We could also get this issue addressed within the next week or two and have a special call meeting, too.
Correct.
So where do we stand?
So I'd entertain a motion to table this until we got more information within the next month.
I would second that motion, but with the qualifier that we should sit down within the next week or so and kind of look back through all of this to understand, an apples to apples comparison on price, electrical, and, recommendations or service experience. We may end up in the exact same place for the staff recommendation.
And it may be the number 2 lowest price. I don't favor any of the names on here. I just want to make sure we get the best value for the town.
Yeah. Seconded your motion to table?
All right, so we'll table it and we'll come back at your discretion, but within the next month. And
You've been very quiet.
That's because I'm totally unfamiliar with this entire project.
okay, so that's tabled.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank
Brian.
you. Chairman's report. I'm going to defer that until after the treasurer's report, because I do want to comment on the treasurer's report. Dorada?
Okay, so the first item is the evaluating investment management and the town's approach to selecting the best investment strategy for the town of Kio Island.
And let me just make a couple of prefaces. So,
On the screen after.
several things. We had right when I got on town council, there was some feedback we heard from the community that maybe there were better investment options, maybe there are safer investment options. There was concern about the stability of the state treasurer's office and what we were investing in. My expertise is investment management, spending the last 25 years in investment management, focused particularly in the bond side, not the equity side. So we set about a process very quickly to look at what we're doing and to look at other better alternatives. And so with that, Dorada?
Yes, so, and just to add to it, as a fiduciary, we should actively evaluate the risk profile and return opportunities for investing our reserves. As of end of the last month, we have about $38.5 million in reserves. Of this amount, about $90 million is in general fund, $8 million is in capital fund, 2.5 in emergency fund, and 10 in restricted for tourism.
And so importantly, we don't have any specific termed liabilities. This is all really general money. There's nothing that's parsed against a specific cash flow stream that goes out into the future, like a pension plan, for example.
And one thing I just want to add to, one of the goals for me for this year is to bring results of, to get a reserve study done too, that will help us determine if those monies, we do have a very healthy balance in all those categories, but to help us determine what level should we necessarily is the minimum we need to keep with.
Hey, Dorota, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Of these 4 categories, which, if any, are available for us to use to invest?
So this is all invested. All this money is already invested. So 38 million is invested in, that's our reserves.
Okay, so we don't have to hold part of the emergency fund, for instance, intact and not available for investment?
So we'll come back to this. Currently, it's all short-term investment. There could be, the money is available the next day. And the emergency fund and capital fund is actually something that the council, previous council, designated that money in. It comes from different sources and is just designated by the council that it will be spent for those purposes.
Oh, okay, sorry, I'm
That's that-
ignorant on this one. So let's say that this is my personal portfolio of 38. And if we want to make that happen, that would be okay. But let's say, so I go to my financial investor, I say, okay, we've got this $40 million. We want X amount in equities, we want X amount in bonds and treasuries. Is that the kind of latitude that you've got with this money?
So
Okay,
we'll
if you
go
would-
to that.
If you would hold that question.
We'll go to
She's
that.
going to talk exactly about that.
Okay.
So just.
Yes.
just
So
bear
it's
with
not
her.
a, that
Perfect
was
question.
totally stupid question. Thank you.
So
I'm sorry, just, Dorota, could you back up just to the one slide, just
Yeah.
on the various reserve funds? And when it was said restricted for tourism, which is right around $10 million, it's not tourism, but that's
tourism-related expenditures.
tourism-related
Yes.
expenditures. But is that, it's obviously not all A-tax money, because A-tax money, we don't have that much A-tax money, and it has to be spent within 2 years.
Yes, so this is all the reserves in all accommodation, local accommodation, county accommodation, hospitality. However, I just grouped them in one, this big category. It could be infrastructure for tourism. But this is,
local accommodations, is that the local option tax?
no, it's local accommodation tax.
Does it still have to be spent like the state accommodations tax on tourism-related expenditures?
Correct,
Per state law?
per state law.
And the same thing with the hospitality?
Hospitality, this is actually, and it's actually our ordinance also. So it's specified in our ordinance for local and hospitality how it could be spent. And it needs to be spent on the tourism-related expenditures.
So parsing that a little bit, is that just our ordinance, which we could change, or is that just our ordinance mimics state law?
State law dictates, and then the municipality adopts the ordinance. And this one thing about those two, actually, local and hospitality, it could be 2%. Right now it's 1%, and this is up to you, to council.
Thank you.
So, as the chairman mentioned, we spent some time on evaluating what's the best way to invest the money, and by that we established an investment committee. It was like maybe more of an ad hoc group that Mr. Farrell led, and we have a representative from our audit committee and myself. We look at our needs, the current needs, the long-term needs, determine what's the long-term versus short-term, the investment horizon. look at the market returns and opportunities. And one thing that is important to, as Councilman Kay mentioned, private person looks at yield. For municipality, our first objective is safety. Second objective is liquidity, and the very third one is yield. So it's a little different at that. And then we issue RFP to see if there is any firms that are interested in helping us manage our investments. So we issue RFP. It was 3 months period. We got a lot of responses, a lot of very qualified and big responses, a lot of big books. So we looked through those, did the initial screening and check if they all were eligible and followed the RFP requirements. We looked at them in detail. We met a number of times discussing it. And finally, we met to recommend as a whole group to you our recommendation. So like I said, we have 12 responses from different, we look at the different evaluation criteria. One big thing we ask for the return for 5 past years to the benchmark. Some underperform, some overperform. They were smaller firms that manage 86 million to a big firm with over almost 900 billions. Like I said, smaller had 21 accounts, some had over 11,000 accounts. 6 to 100 professionals working on the portfolios. Some were on the market only 3 years to 36 years. And the fees that were charged varies from 8 basis points to 40 basis points. So now we can, to answer Councilman Kay's question, we are restricted by the state law and further by our investment policy on what we can invest in. So our allowed instruments are the U.S. Treasury bills, notes and bonds with the 5-year maximum maturity, federal agency or U.S. government sponsor securities, CDs, for the institutions in South Carolina, municipal bonds, general bonds, and revenue bonds, and money market securities and funds, commercial papers, bank CDs, treasury notes, and agency notes. There is a big, so the list is pretty limited. What's not allowed is equities in common stock, corporate bonds, derivatives, and emerging market debt, high-yield bonds, uninsured or unsecured deposits, and non-U.S. Currencies.
That's according to state law.
That's state law. Mm-hmm.
So this is a very important page. This really describes what we can and cannot do. And so this is, our goal is to invest reserves. So it should be high quality, it should be safe, and should be providing as much yield as appropriate given the kind of the restrictions we have. So when you look at this, you think about treasuries, full faith and credit of the U.S. government, 5-year max maturity. You don't have any credit risk, and we're going to talk about this more. You don't have any extension risk, which means they can't go longer like mortgages can. And you don't have a whole lot of interest rate risk with a 5-year treasury. There's something called duration, but 5 years is not a whole lot of interest rate risk as compared to like a 30-year. And the rest of this is when you go past federal agency and government securities, or GSEs, the rest of it is really money market type instruments, certificates of deposit, CD, commercial paper. So it's really built around a very short-term investment, a very high-quality investment. And to your point, something that's very liquid. So if we needed money tomorrow, given our current investment, we could sell it, it's just like a checking account that gives us a good yield on it. We can get, well, throughout, say, 3 days, but we can get it very quickly, without any market risk. It doesn't matter whether the market's up 500 or down 500, our principal is gonna stay right at 1 all the time, and we're just gonna get yield on it. So the net asset value does not change for what we're currently investing in, and that's sort of what we were looking for when we did this. But we got a lot of responses from some very high-quality firms, some firms that specialized in government securities, some consultants who were, they were the ones who charged the most because they would then recommend another firm to us. So we went through the RFPs and we looked at what our investment limits were, and that was kind of our guiding light, if you will, is these investment limitations and liquidity.
I would just, following up on that, we're not an endowment, and there is no need to grow the principal base in order to fund ongoing operations or to, build new buildings for, a school or something like that, or to support the athletic program. The principal job here is to protect principal, by and large. I mean, we're extraordinarily fortunate as a municipality to have an unbelievably strong balance sheet with, our reserves substantially exceed the total cost of all our assets if we had to replace this building and our 3 miles of road and the bridge. But still, we would still have excess reserves apart from insurance coverage and FEMA funds and things like that. So just trying to increase, we should prudently take advantage of yield opportunities, but there's no need to take what I would consider to be imprudent risk in chasing yield, given our circumstances.
Well, yes, and once you take equities off the table, then I stop worrying about not taking advantage of the last how many years worth of incredible performance, because that's not open to us as an option. So that's good understanding, thank you.
Okay, and so our current investments are now in LGIP, which is the South Carolina Local Government Investment Pool. It was created by the South Carolina Treasurer to provide an opportunity for local governments to pull in the money. As of 6/30, 2024, the balance in the pool was 14 billion, with about 1,000 accounts and 300 participants. It's just for our state. And LGIP, because it is also a governmental entity, they follow the same investment guidelines. And so the first one is the preservation of capital, maintenance of adequate liquidity, and obtaining a reasonable return. Here are some details on the performance of their full portfolio that I will let Mr. Chairman to brief on.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing about this slide is really up at the top on the left-hand side, the WAL, that's weighted average life. WAM, weighted average maturity. They're similar, but the weighted average life and weighted average maturity, they're both what you would call cash or enhanced cash type investments. Very short, measured in days, not in years like bonds are typically done. So weighted average maturity, 37 days. It's very liquid, incredibly low interest rate risk. And if you look at the rest of this, the quality is very high, so very low credit risk. It really fits exactly what we want to do. And can you go back to the previous page?
Sure.
If you look on the right-hand side of this page, in order, their goals are preservation of capital, maintenance of liquidity, and then finding a reasonable return.
Luke, question. Sorry for
No,
the need
not at
for
all.
clarification, but is this then the agency or whoever we select to manage our portfolio, or is this The pool of money. I don't understand
Go to
where
the next
this fits
page.
in.
So here's how it works. The state of South Carolina administers this fund.
Yeah.
It's $14 billion, over 1,000 different entities in South Carolina invest in this fund. They don't do the actual management, they do the administration. There's a company called Federated. You've heard of Federated? They're a big mutual firm. They're like a Fidelity or,
UBS.
yes, they're not a bank, but they're an independent, they're like Fidelity is probably the best example. But they're a well-known, long-standing investment management firm that's been around, and they happen to be the one who managed this fund. And they've done a very nice job. They manage all 14 billion, but they don't, it's called a white label fund. They don't advertise their name on it. South Carolina calls it the local government investment pool. So it's very high-quality management and then very conservatively managed appropriately for the guidelines of what they're trying to do. And again, it's high credit quality, low credit risk, low interest rate risk. It's for safety, security, capital preservation, and liquidity, which is, again, exactly what we want.
And one thing I would note that this is a very distinct, different investment pool than what people often hear about state investment funds. It's the state retirement systems
Oh, yes.
Yes.
that are
Yes, that's
invested.
completely
And
different.
those will take a broad range of different financial risk in order to chase return. But that's not what this is. So the state does have the South Carolina Retirement Investment Commission, for example. They manage a larger pool of assets that support the retirement fund that we're contributing into. But there is a lot of equity risk, both private and public equity risk in those, as well as sometimes derivatives, overlays, and things like that. That's distinct from what this pool is.
Okay,
Completely separate.
thank you.
And here is just to see the performance compared to the benchmark, which is the pretty much T-bills. And you can see they pretty much outperform looking at the different 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. They outperform the benchmark, which is a very conservative benchmark. And with the conservative, what we need to invest in, great results.
And being in the business and knowing this, their benchmark, they've chosen a relatively difficult benchmark to beat. They could have said 90% or 100% 90-day T-bills. And that would have been a little bit easier, but they put some short governments, Bloomberg, Barclays, not credit quality, but not double B credit quality, but Bloomberg, Barclays, short government. That has more agency, it has some credit risk in it. So they've picked a difficult benchmark to beat, and they're beating it. So they're doing a nice job.
And again, just say the algebra strategy risk that we already talked about, low credit, low interest rate risk, low volatility risk, and low extension risk. That's their strategy. And finally, the conclusion from our exercise is given our investment needs, near-term cash needs, yields, and mostly investment limitation, market rate, and fees, we are not recommending any changes to the current reserve approach. And we remain confident that LGIP, the local government investment pool, meets our investment needs.
And who's going to manage it?
It's managed by it's administered by the state, and it's managed by Federated Investments.
Oh, and one thing too, they charge 2 to 3 basis points. So it's also very low cost of managing the portfolio, which is great too.
Now, one thing that was mentioned to me in previous meetings is, should we be looking to lock in longer-term rates? We think rates are going to fall, so why not go out and lock in rates now? Well, today our yield is still right about 5%, plus or minus. If you even extend it out to buy a 2-year security, you give up about 80 basis points, almost a whole percent you give up by just moving to lock in rates for 2 years. So the market is anticipating rates falling, And so they've already marked those yields down. So it might make sense, but you'd have to do an evaluation to say, how much lower do you think rates are going to go? And will they go in a time when that 2-year will appreciate in value more than 80 basis points? And that's a very difficult thing to do. I've done it for 25 years, and I'd say if I do it 55% of the time correctly, it's a home run. But I don't think now, given kind of our broad goals and objectives, we don't need to be reaching for a little bit extra risk right now and giving up yield in the short run for maybe some capital appreciation. I think this is a great investment for us right now, and it's done a great job in terms of their benchmark performance. So we're not recommending any changes. Our conclusion is we should stay the course.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. So I have other part of my report. I have the 4 months for you of our budget to actual performance. I don't know if you want to, if Neil will just change it on your screen very quick, but overall, for 4 months, we've collected 5.8 million in revenues, which is about 38% of the total budgeted. It is 355,000 higher than it was last year through the same time period. Yeah, that's great.
I was just trying to go full screen.
And there are a few items that are showing some variances when compared to last year. And one negative variance is in building permits, but it's because last year we collected the building permit for the upper lower beach walker project. It was one-time payment of 900,000. This year we have not collected it. We are gonna refund the payment actually and collect another payment this year, but hence that big variance in building permits. When we look at just regular permits, we actually collected about 200 more than we've collected last year through end of October. The business license revenue shows an increase of about 90%, and it's due to the number of licenses issued. We issue almost 500 licenses more this year than last year, and I'm projecting the trend will continue through the end of the year, and our actually business license revenue will be higher than budgeted.
And for clarification, you said the 900,000 in building permits was from which of the developments?
The upper lower beach walker.
Thank you.
That was collected last year.
Okay.
So just a little issue that has come up in that regard is that a portion, it's not the entire 900,000, there was a clarification on that, but 60%, 55 or 60% of that was attributable to Ocean Pines. Lower Beach Walker, not Upper Beach Walker, that will be refunded. But there has been representation from the developer that a new yes, a new building permit application will soon be forthcoming, in which case there will be fees paid by, on behalf, essentially, the new general contractor for Ocean Pines in the relatively near future.
Got it.
Yes. And other revenues are pretty much in line with the budget and comparable to last year. The variances are explained by the timing. As far as the expenditures, we spent for 1 million or 38%, 29% of the current budget. The majority of expenditures are within the budget, with the exception, or comparable to last year, with the exception of 2 items. One of it is the public safety off-duty deputies. We actually had more coverage this year for those 4 months than last year, about 750 hours more. And also there was an increase in their pay in February of this year. And the waste management is showing some increase, but it's due to a new contract. However, I do think as of now, our expenditures are within the budget. Any questions? No, thank you.
Thank you, Jerome.
Thank you, Dorado. So I made a lot of my comments as we went through the reserve study. And so I think with that, I'll just, other than the comments I made earlier about SATAX, we've got a couple things to do there. But otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to any other comments from anybody else on the board?
No, Mr. Chairman, not for me.
Nope.
Any citizen comments?
Any citizens?
Well, at the Kika budget meeting.
All right, with that, meeting's adjourned.
You.